I had a little dialogue with some Unitarians on the 27th of July 2013, and I cannot mask my surprise at some of the argumentation that has been utilized by these two. The first point I want to say is that they dismiss the concept of Jesus being the God-man as unbiblical. Though they do make arguments against the Trinity, mere assertions will not do it all. You have to demonstrate that the Trinity is true or false. One argument that was presented was Jesus cannot be God because he died. Firstly, this is a deceptive question because a Unitarian who is not influenced by soul sleep will acknowledge that a person dies, that when a person dies, they go to Sheol, where a person is fully conscious. I assume one of the Unitarians I spoke to believes hell and Sheol are the same thing, but that's another topic. I would need to know his position on that a bit better. Anyway, death in a Christian context doesn't mean ceasing to exist. Death is biological cessation. It is not heresy to say God died, provided death is defined correctly. Jesus as the God-man did not cease to exist. The Unitarian, if I recall, admitted Jesus went to Sheol. If he is in Sheol, Jesus would still be fully conscious and communicate with others who were there. It is only heresy to say that God ceased to exist, and it's not heresy to say he died. I'm not addressing these points in the order they were brought up, I'm just simply going through them regardless of the order. The next objection I want to tackle is Numbers 23:19, which is often misused to attack Jesus being God. First of all, God taking on human flesh doesn't negate his deity or divinity. Jesus was still God, but his deity did not vanish when he took on flesh. Furthermore, Trinitarians don't worship the flesh. We worship the Holy One who tabernacled among us. We agree, God is not a man, but this doesn't mean he cannot take on a human nature and still be God. Secondly, the context is saying that God isn't like man. He never lies like man does. If God says he's going to do something, he'll deliver. This can be also found in Hosea 11 and 1 Samuel 15. But I agree, God in and of himself is not in nature man, but that doesn't mean he cannot take on a human nature, which is precisely what Christ did. A question to the Unitarians: can God become man and still remain fully God, and not cease being God? If not, why not? If you're going to say it makes no sense, well, God existing from eternity makes no sense either, and you would have to reject it on that basis. Another point of contention is Jesus is a distinct person from the Father, which is exactly what Trinitarians believe. At least Unitarians can agree that the modalists are in error on this point. Where the Unitarians are going into unbiblical doctrine, however, is when they use this to deny Christ as God. When Jesus took on flesh according to Philippians 2, he emptied himself of his divine prerogatives and took the form of a slave, reclaiming them after going back to heaven, and to this day relates to the Father as his God, because in Revelation he is still the God-man. He is both the Alpha and the Omega, but also subservient to the Father in terms of position and rank, not essence and nature. Jesus relates to the Father as his God by virtue of the fact that he is fully human, and he identifies himself as the Alpha and the Omega, much like Yahweh does. He identifies himself with the ego I me sayings of Isaiah 41:4, Isaiah 43:10, Deuteronomy 32:39, and others, by virtue of being God. Although translations differ, that's another issue for another time. And of course I assume there are probably topics discussing this somewhere on the internet. Now James White, in his book The Forgotten Trinity, and a talk that Sam Shamoon has done on my YouTube account, they go into greater detail regarding the I am sayings on John 8:58 and Exodus 3:14, and they go into much greater detail than I do. I will also post James White's video on the Carmen Christi and Harpag Moss in the description below, which goes into detail regarding the subject of Philippians 2, in case you want to dispute what the text is talking about. And to the user, an issue of your sincerity, I say this to you. If you're watching this, feel free to look at it. To briefly touch upon Jesus' ego I me statement in early church writings in John 8:58, I'll post links in the description of two early church writings. particularly Irenaeus of Lyons as one, and Origen as another, for you guys to read at your own leisure. Now, I may not be a fan of Origen, but what he says in response to Celsus is pretty interesting. Regarding Colossians 2:9 and Ephesians 3:19, they are addressing two different subjects. They're not even addressing the same subject. Colossians 2 speaks about being careful not to be misled by hollow and deceptive philosophy, whereas Ephesians 3 refers to growing in the knowledge and the love of God, which is Paul's prayer for the Ephesians. Neither passages are even relevant to one another, so to use this to attack the interpretation of Colossians given by Trinitarians would be a red herring. Colossians 2:9 speaks of the fullness of deity dwelling in bodily form, which is not merely the Father indwelling Jesus as some claim. It is speaking of the dual natures of Christ. Ephesians 3:19, however, speaks on the subject of growing in the faith, or growing in knowing the depth of Christ's love. Also note what Colossians 1:15-20 states about Christ, which I'll mention briefly here, and I have mentioned this in my response to Tovia Singer. Firstborn in that context refers to Christ's preeminence over all creation, not him being the first created. Although verses 19 and 20 may be misconstrued to simply say, the Father simply indwelt Jesus, why does Paul, only a few verses beforehand, say that all things in heaven and on earth were created through Jesus? Obviously referring to angels, heaven, the earth, and all that inhabit the earth. And also, it was created for him. Now may I ask you, is a mere man the one who brings all things into existence? No. This means Jesus cannot be a created being if he existed before all things, obviously referring to created things, not the Father or the Spirit. I mean, Father, Son, and Spirit existed before all things. Not only this, all things and consist and hold together by Christ's own power. That's another thing to consider. Furthermore, I want to address Ephesians 4:6, where it says one God, and this ties in with a point that not only that one of the Unitarians made, but it ties in with a point that vile reprobate saved by baptism or crown of righteousness has brought to me in the past. So this video will also address his point. In the New Testament, it is common for the Father being called God and Jesus being called Lord as their primary designations. Do these negate the Father as Lord or the Son as God? Absolutely not. Also, even if you want to argue that Lord is used of angels, it depends on context. Jesus is called Lord in the supreme sense, and in the same sense that the Father is called Lord. In the context of angels and men, they are ordinary lords. The same thing with the Moses made a God statement. This doesn't mean Moses is God like Yahweh, it refers to him being a representative. But that's not how Thomas uses God of Jesus in John 20:28. But that's another story. Jude refers to Christ in his letter as being the only sovereign Lord. Does that mean he excludes the Father from being Lord? Of course not. Now there are commentaries that speak of this issue, which I'll post in the description below. Now back to Ephesians 4, verses 4-6, it says, quote, "There is one body and one Spirit, just as you all called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all." Unquote. There is a similar phrase in 1 Corinthians 8, although the two chapters are addressing two different topics, one has to do with meat offered to idols, and the other has to do with making an effort to live a godly life. Now notice the following. In 1 Corinthians 8, verses 4-6, quote, "So then, about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there is no God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came, and for whom we live. And there is but one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom all things came, and through whom we live." Unquote. Both sections speak of one God and one Lord. Does this mean that neither possess each other's titles? No. Would my assertion mean that there are two gods? No. Why? Because the Trinity in the Scripture makes it clear that there is one God in three persons, not three gods. This is the next point I'll address, because the Unitarians brought up pagan parallels to the Trinity, which has been refuted by many over and over again. The Hindu Trimurti was brought up in the room, but this is not even remotely a comparison to the Trinity. Likewise with Greek myths such as Agathon and others. There is nothing in ancient pagan religions that is even remotely similar to the Trinity. Not even the Hindu Trimurti is even remotely similar, despite the strange conspiracies out there. This argumentation is used by many anti-Trinitarians, and what's sad is that this very argumentation used by them can be used very forcefully to destroy the virgin birth, especially the abuse of the Horus and Mithra myths, neither of which were virgin-born. Horus was born as a result of Isis raising a husband from the dead, from the grave, to have sex with and conceive Horus. Not to mention Mithra was born out of a rock in a cave. But those lies about virgin birth parallels are still circulated around the internet by the likes of Acharya S. and Gift to Christians, both of whom are children of the devil who want to carry out their father's desire. And of course also, these absurd lies about virgin birth comparisons, which are not even there, this is similar argumentation that's being used against the Trinity. And if these anti-Trinitarians were consistent, they would have to reject the virgin birth as well on that basis. The next point I would like to address is the common assertion that the Council of Nicaea is where the Trinity was conjured up, which is another bold-faced lie presented by the Unitarians. Nicaea did not invent the Trinity. It was convened to deal with the subject of Arianism as one of the many topics. Inspiring Philosophy has done a video on this topic and demonstrates this fact. Now, regarding Nicaea's attitude toward Easter, that's another topic, and to be honest, I don't see Easter in the Bible anyway, so don't even bother using that as an argument against Nicaea. Carrying on, Nicaea itself dealt with Arius' heresy quite effectively, but this didn't stop the Arians from trying to wipe out the Trinitarians, because of the Arians given preeminence over the Trinitarians by Constantine, which most Unitarians conveniently fail to mention. The Arians, though fewer in number, had greater power, with Constantine even being baptized by Eusebius of Nicomedia, an Arian, not to be confused with Eusebius of Caesarea, who himself was present at the Council of Nicaea. Inspiring Philosophy speaks more about this issue in depth, and I'm happy to post a link to that video. Another argument I'll address is the subject of the Antichrist. The hilarious thing is, one of the Unitarians said that Trinitarians are Antichrist because they deny the Anointed One coming in the flesh, and say God came in the flesh instead. I'm dead serious, this argument was actually used. This is funny because no Trinitarian denies that Jesus is the Christ or the Anointed One, or the Mashiach. It is God the Son being anointed by God the Father. And yes, I know Jesus is called the Son of God, so what? Son of God can refer to righteous servants or adopted sons, depending on context. However, Son of God, in reference to Christ, not to anyone else, in reference to Christ, refers to his deity. Furthermore, Christ coming in the flesh presupposes the pre-human existence of Christ, not to mention that 1 John is an anti-Gnostic polemic against the Docetists, not a text which condemns Trinitarians. Jesus being God is not a denial of Jesus being the Christ, unless you want to condemn the blessed Apostle John, who says in John 1:1-4 and John 1:14 the following. Quote, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life is the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Unquote. Now for verse 14, quote, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us." The Greek there is tabernacled, We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth, unquote. And of course, finally, John 1:18. Quote, no one has seen God but the one and only Son, who himself is God and is in the closest relationship with the Father, has made him known, unquote. The Greek phrase used of Jesus is monogenes theos, or the unique God. In the text, Jesus, who is at the Father's side, has made him known. Now also another point. As I said before, Son of God in reference to Christ refers to his deity, just as Son of Man refers to his humanity. But Jesus is also a particular Son of Man. He is the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, who receives worship by all nations. And I'm sure you're familiar with Daniel 7:13-14. And I've mentioned this in other videos, so I needn't mention it again in this one. Now, I hope I've addressed all the points that have been brought to the table, and I thank you guys for taking the time to watch. Take care.